Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Appreciate your being here. As I said earlier, I think Ohio has a good system in place in terms of testing and transparency and make sure we're communicating this clearly to stakeholders. You mentioned the infrastructure legislation having $10 billion to address PFAS. This is an historic investment. As you know, it's going to flow to the states through the Clean and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds, as well as through the Small and Disadvantaged Communities Grant Program. Can you talk a little about how that's going to impact what you're doing back home? How will that help this PFAS funding in the infrastructure bill to address and prevent PFAS contamination, particularly in drinking water?
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. And we very much appreciate the funding support that's being provided through the infrastructure bill to help address PFAS challenges in Ohio. As mentioned in my testimony, going through the process of collecting the sample data from our public water systems under the action plan, it's provided us with very important information that we can use in putting these dollars to work. We look forward to developing a plan for potential uses for this funding. Also be working with our stakeholders, including public water systems, to get their thoughts and ideas on how to best use this money. One area where we can see this funding being applied is in helping our systems that have low level of PFAS detections upgrade their treatment systems or make other infrastructure improvements that both reduce PFAS risk and best prepare them for future regulations related to PFAS in drinking water. In addition, Ohio EPA will look to explore additional testing and planning for addressing PFAS contamination. The availability of this funding will allow public water systems to install treatment or potentially develop alternate sources of drinking water quickly and will help reduce the financial burden on its customers and the public water systems itself.
Well, I'm pleased to see that you have a plan, and it sounds like it's a very constructive one to deal with our needs in Ohio, at least, and I hope other states have similar plans. We're going to be following up on this, making sure that this legislation is properly implemented. It's a lot of money, and properly used, I think it can make a huge difference in terms of PFAS. The other aspect that we talked about earlier is the research, and although we have some research on some of these chemicals, of the over 4,700 chemicals, I think the federal government can do a better job there. Would it be helpful for you to have better research, and federal research in particular, with regard to the health impacts of some of these chemicals?
It absolutely would. Certainly the state relies on the federal government and their expertise in this area, and relies on the federal government to conduct the needed research and develop technical guidance. It's critical for the states to implement these types of regulations, especially with the complexity of PFAS. Most states lack that resource to conduct this work on their own, and on top of including the regulation of all of our regulatory programs. The development of these regulatory standards, most states heavily rely on the federal government, and we certainly understand the importance of that.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Johnson.